Well, I know you've been welcomed many times, but I have to do my little welcome. Welcome. Really glad you're here. I was driving back from North Carolina last night with my daughter, who's 2 years away from putting my rear end in that seat, and we were talking all about college applications and where she wants to go and what I talk about in these crazy talks that she should know, all this stuff, and she's already getting a little anxious, and it makes me appreciate where you all already are as parents and the work you've already done to get them here and for you to be here. So welcome. My name's Tim Davis. I'm the Executive Director for Student Resilience and Leadership Development here at UVA in the UVA Career Center. And for those of you wondering, yes, it is as cool a job as it sounds. My career prior to UVA took me through a bunch of other schools and colleges. I came here from the University of Michigan. It was at another Big Ten before that. And being here at UVA and having the opportunity to work with your children to help them not only develop into better students, but better people of influence and stronger emotional young adults is really a privilege. And I love being here working with them. I have a prior career in business. Many of you probably come from business backgrounds. I used to work in Cincinnati. Grew up in Cincinnati. Any Buckeyes here? Yeah? OH. There we go. I worked for Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, and I marketed consumer products for a living. And one of the reasons I mention that is I'm one of those typical college graduates who had a pretty significant change in career, even 6, 7 years out. And that's okay. It turned out okay. It really freaks the students out when I talk to them about that they can expect probably 2 to 3 major career changes in their career, that's the norm. And for me, it was a smooth transition. I did used to market consumer products, as I said. For those of you who might be familiar with Procter & Gamble and their product lines, any guesses just based on appearance, maybe what I used to market? Toothpaste, diapers, Tide, right? Hair care? You look like a really nice person. You've got a little mean streak in you, don't you? Yeah. You're also very perceptive, because I used to market shampoo for a living. I got out just in time. Yeah. So, tell me that's not me. That's okay. So, first of all, well done. Congratulations, sincerely. You've done a great job of getting your sons and daughters ready for college and ready for a place like UVA, and your achievement speaks for itself. UVA is not an easy place to get into, but with your support, your children, your students, have achieved so much academically, extracurricularly, and personally. I mean, we really do consider all those things in admissions to this place. But here's the thing, and it's the primary message of this talk today. For them to continue to be as successful as they've been up to this point, you're going to have to make some changes in how you're parenting them. For many of you who have been through this before with other students, you already know that it takes a different set of skills to raise a college student than it does to raise a high school student or a grade school student. And just to add a cruel little twist, it's getting harder. We're not 100% sure why, but it appears that college students are becoming less emotionally resourceful, less resilient than in years past. The answer as to why, we're not really clear on yet, because we don't have a lot of longitudinal research on resilience in young adults. What we do have is longitudinal research on emotional and mental well-being of college students. So I'm a former counseling center director, so I know that data pretty well, and I'm going to share a little bit of it with you today. This is data from the past 10 years on the frequency of the most common presenting concerns at university counseling centers nationally. So what are you seeing? I'm going to pick on the orchestra pit and you way up there in the balcony, because my students know that the students that sit in the back of the room, they get picked on the worst. So we'll go back and forth. So what are you seeing? Big time increases in anxiety, right? And depression and issues in relationships. So the big three, right? But what used to be in college counseling centers is that relationship concerns were usually highest back in the 70s and 80s. And then it was depression, hands down. I mean, when I started working in higher ed and came out of industry, 9 out of 10 times when you went to greet a student in the waiting area, they were there for depression. And you can actually see that back in 2007. Depression was still the highest. But today, it's bar none anxiety. And one thing that we think might be going on, that I think might be going on, amongst many other factors, but I think a prominent factor, is overparenting. A little bit more data for you. We also know that the average onset of a first major depressive disorder has gone from an average of age 30, when the brain's more developed, there's more life skills to manage it, to age of 15. And we know that the emotional well-being of college students, based on research coming out of the UCLA Higher Education Research Institute, the emotional well-being of first-year college students is at an all-time low by their own self-ratings. So the question is, what can you all do as parents of first-year college students in order to enhance their emotional resilience, their ability to get through some of the expected challenges and difficulties that are just going to come as a part of being in college? Well, today we're going to talk about 5 strategies for you as parents that will address that question. How can you raise more resilient college students, not only in the next 30 days when you've still got them under your roof, but throughout the first semester that they're here at UVA? So strategy 1, give them permission to struggle. You see, most families who send their kids to UVA are pretty hyperachieving families. Mom and dad have worked really hard. They've often accomplished a great deal in their personal lives and their careers. And for many of our students, I've seen this over and over and over and over again when I was doing a lot more direct clinical service with students. UVA students often internalize that experience from their family backgrounds as a rule, kind of an unconscious rule, but it's there. And the rule's this: I'm not allowed to struggle. What we now know is that college students don't grow and develop to their full potential without struggle. In my private work, I coach leaders and executive teams, and we often talk about the value of humility. It's probably the most frequent topic now that we touch base on. And because in today's business climate, things are moving so fast. New information's being produced so quickly that no one leader can do it all anymore. And one of the new key measures of leadership success, in my estimation, is how adept leaders are at saying, I don't know. I'm struggling a little bit. I need some help. I need some input. You know the 3 most valuable words in a leader's vocabulary? It's not I love you. Never say that at work. The 3 most valuable, powerful words in a leader's vocabulary is I need you. That's the message in Ed Hess's new book, a colleague of mine up at the Darden School. I'm in student affairs. I'm at the Career Center. I'm not at Darden, but Ed is at Darden. And in his new book called Humility is the New Smart, he puts forth the idea that leaders have to get better at the skills of humility and bringing other people in to fill their shallow areas, right? They have to be humble. It's no different with your students. Hear me, it's no different with your students. You have to teach them to be humble, to expect to be challenged, to expect the struggles that will come with their graduation into young adulthood and their college years. Teach them to willingly encounter their limits and engage their struggles, because that is what will develop them as people and as young professionals. This is a slide I just want to share with you briefly. This is a quote from an article in the New Yorker from a couple of years ago on how people learn to become resilient. You can read it for yourself. But the one thing that I strongly disagree with in this slide is the idea that there's anything lucky about avoiding adversity. Adversity is a critical component for building emotional resilience. In fact, too few of setbacks in young people stunts the development of emotional resilience skills. Why, orchestra pit? Why would too few of setbacks stunt emotional resilience skills? They don't know how to deal with anything, right? They have to come up against the limits of their emotional coping skills in order to develop new coping skills. But too many setbacks eventually can also make it hard to bounce back. So what's optimal? Well, scholars in this area term optimal negative life outcome, an optimal amount of negative life events as being 6 to 12 highly negative life events produces optimal emotional resilience. 6 to 12. So what we know is that when our students come up against their struggles, that's really when they're at their greatest opportunity to develop new skills and to be strong. So please help them anticipate that they will struggle. They will sometimes come up short during their college years, and Lord knows thereafter. We all do. They might get a C in a class, or worse. They will lose elections. And it's all okay. It's even critical, because they are here to grow more than they are here to shine. Strategy number 2, support a growth mindset. Now, Carol Dweck, is anybody familiar with Carol Dweck's growth mindset research at Stanford? Maybe some people who are in the education fields might be. So Carol Dweck has put forth this research and this idea about starting 10 years ago, that we all have, to one degree or another, one of two mindsets. Fixed mindset is one in which we believe that IQ and most other capabilities are innate and limited. And really, it's genetics that drives the development of our talents and our abilities. Growth mindset, on the other hand, is one in which we believe that IQ and most other capabilities are malleable. And it's effort and persistence that drives the development of our talents and capabilities. Now, her research has shown that growth mindset is associated with a wide range of positive outcomes, including enhanced emotional resilience, getting through tough times. It's associated with lower anxiety, lower depression, more life satisfaction, and more personal confidence. All things that I am 100% sure that we all want for our kids. You know, Dweck's research also shows that growth mindset can be taught. We can shift ourselves and we can shift our students into a growth mindset. If it wasn't possible to shift them into a growth mindset, this would be interesting and irrelevant. So the question is, how do we help them shift into a growth mindset? Well, one way is to teach them about neuroplasticity. You see, we used to believe that their brains, by the time they got to us here in Charlottesville, were a finished product. And in fact, what we now know is that the brain is continuously changing and adapting and making new connections on our behalf to help us learn, to help us get better throughout the lifespan. That's called neuroplasticity. You see, each of those little orange glows up there on that graphic represent a connection between two neurons, two brain cells. And this is what happens when our brain learns something new. Neurons reach out and they connect with one another. Those are neural pathways, and those neural pathways, once they become permanent, house new skills and new learning. And here's the important part. When those same connections are lit up 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, 12 times, guess what happens? Those connections become permanent. They become new neural pathways in the brain. They form new long-term structures. And we now know that this is how we all get smarter over time. And the idea that intelligence and talent is somehow limited is bunk. But here's the catch. There's always a catch, isn't there? No free lunches, even here at UVA. To really benefit from neuroplasticity, you have to do things that are difficult for you. You have to do things that take you beyond the limit of your current skill set. What I often tell my students is you get smart from doing things that make you feel dumb. That's a problem for a lot of UVA students. UVA students don't like to do things that make them feel dumb. They like to do things that make them look smart, that make them look competent, that make them look like there's no limit to their intelligence and their personal capabilities. But for neuroplasticity to really benefit them, they have to exhibit a preference for complex and difficult work, and that often makes them feel dumb. See, the brain is like a muscle. So to build up muscle tissue, what do you have to do? Lift weights, right? Exercise. And is it comfortable? No. The brain's no different. For it to get stronger, for it to get smarter, to build up neurological mass that literally, if you weigh it, you can weigh this stuff. Your brain gets heavier if you push yourself enough over time. For that to happen, your brain has to strain. Your brain has to feel like it's lifting weight that it's never lifted before. And for your brain to be smarter than it's ever been before, it's no different than a muscle. For your muscles to be stronger than they've ever been before, you have to lift more weight than you've ever lifted before. And the brain's no different. To build up more muscle, you have to lift more weight. To get smarter, you have to do things that feel hard and make you feel dumb. So another way that you can help shift your kids to a growth mindset is to learn to praise them effectively. So how do we praise effectively? Well, encourage you to focus on praising behaviors, not traits. Behaviors, not traits. Avoid praising effort. Praise effort. Praise persistence. Praise new strategies. But avoid praising intelligence. Avoid praising talent or ability. Now, does this mean we should turn down the volume on our excitement for our kids when we're proud of them or when they do something important? Not at all. I mean, I've got 3 kids, and I feel most alive when I'm cheering them on and encouraging them. But there's a way to do it that's helpful, and there's a way to do it that's actually harmful. So what does that look like? Well, to help illustrate that point, let me tell you about a study conducted by Carol Dweck and her colleagues out at Stanford. So in this study, Dr. Dweck looked at 400 students, and they were all given an easy test of intelligence. So all 400 students represented by those blue dots, they all did great on that easy test of intelligence. Then they were randomly divided into 2 groups. One group was praised with, "You did well. You must be smart." And the other group was praised with, "You did well. You must have worked hard." Then all 400 students were given the choice of taking another test. And they were told about this test. They were given the choice on this test and told you can take one test on which you will surely do well because it's an easy test. Or you can take a test that's harder. You may not do well on it, but surely you will grow and get smarter. In the smart group, only 33% chose the harder test, the group that was praised for being smart. But in the effort group, 92% who were praised for working hard chose the harder test. Now, this test was designed in a way, to be clear, that they isolated the variable of how these students were praised. And the variable is strictly you're smart or you worked hard. And that made that much difference in which test that they chose to take. Now, to go a little further with it, all the kids were then given a really hard intelligence test, one in which they were sure to fail. Sure to fail. The smart group, the group praised for being smart, tended to get frustrated and give up easily. But the effort group worked harder and longer, and according to their self-report, enjoyed it. Then, finishing off the study, all 400 students were given a very difficult test of intelligence, as difficult as the first one that they took. This is the kicker. You see what's coming, don't you? I see heads nodding. That's why I like the orchestra pit. I can get a little preview on how things are going. You're right. The smart group, praised for being smart, were less smart on the second test. Their scores declined by 20%. It was basically the same test they took at the beginning of the research. The group that was praised for being hardworking increased their scores by 30%. So if you're interested in this kind of approach to growth mindset and really affirmation of struggle and failure in the pursuit of excellence, then you might want to let your kids know about a group here at UVA called the Resilience Project. And these are students of mine who I had in my first year seminar 2 years ago who got so turned on to some of these ideas about developing emotional resilience in other students that they formed a student organization called the Resilience Project. You can reach them at that Facebook, by searching on Facebook on the Resilience Project or at that email. And I'm going to spend some time with all of your students this afternoon as well. I'll tell them about that group too, but I would encourage you to foster their curiosity about the Resilience Project. So strategy number 3, foster optimism. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, oh, optimism. And we tried that in the 70s and we all wound up insecure. It's overrated. It's not what you think. At least it's not what we've been taught to believe about optimism. Because this is not optimism. We know that just painting a smiley face on yourself when things are closing in on you and feel really bad is not a path to emotional resilience. This is optimism. Optimism is a predisposition to see what is happening that is good, that is beautiful, and that has the potential for growth. But optimists don't just focus on what's going right in their lives. They're objective. It isn't that they don't see problems or negative forces. They just choose to focus their attention on things that meet 2 conditions. 1, they focus on things that are under their control. They know other things are going on. They know there's a cloud on the horizon. They understand that bad things can happen. It's just not where they focus their energy unless it's something they can do something about. And 2, they focus their attention on things that have the potential for positive outcomes. That Andy Grammer song, Keep Your Head Up, doesn't mean act happy when things are going bad. It means keep your head up so that you can see both opportunities and threats. But optimists are just like good investors. They just choose to put their resources where they think they're going to have the best return on their investment. And optimism, just so you know, is scientifically associated with a range of positive health outcomes, including cancer outcomes, cardiovascular health. But the science most relevant to your students' optimism, or lack thereof, is its proven impact on mood and anxiety. Back to the 2 most frequent presenting concerns at university counseling centers that we talked about earlier. So foster optimism. Strategy 4, encourage their life outside the classroom, encourage their social life, encourage their extracurricular life. Now notice I said social life, not partying life. And this is where students go, huh? A lot of them don't know the difference. Big difference, right? We know that healthy relationships predict a mind-boggling number of positive health outcomes, including happiness. Researchers at Harvard found that among undergraduate students, much like your children, social support was a greater predictor of happiness than any other factor in their study. Social support, greater than GPA, family income, SAT scores, age, gender, or race. And the students who had a stronger sense that they belong in school and felt socially integrated performed better academically. And this was especially true of first-generation college students, which I'm really proud to say comprise 15% of the incoming class at UVA. So just to summarize, we know that healthy relationships and strong social support networks predict two things in your students in the upcoming year: happiness and good grades. Life outside the classroom is where the skills and competencies get developed that matter most after UVA as well. Now, at UVA, we pride ourselves on developing great leaders, and my guess is that's at least in part why some of you are sending your students to us. We're good at that. It's a huge part of my role at UVA. I take what I know to be best practices about working with executive leaders and executive teams and use that understanding to help UVA students develop the leadership competencies and the emotional resilience skills that are most predictive of life after college. Now, the default thinking of a lot of parents who send their kids to UVA is that you're sending them here to get smarter, to build their intellectual brain power. And that's great. That's a great endeavor. We'll work really hard on that. But the scholars who have looked at what separates highly effective leaders from average leaders have found that IQ has relatively little to do with that. It has little to do with explaining the difference between the best leaders and average leaders. In fact, IQ explains about 15% of the variance or the difference between the best leaders out there nationally and just ho-hum leaders. But one item accounts for approximately 85% of the difference. 85% can be explained by one cluster of variables. Any guesses? Any guesses up there in the balcony? I told you I was going to pick on you. Any guesses? I'm sorry? Equity? Good guess. No. Optimism? No. Emotional IQ. Emotional and social intelligence. 85% of the difference. Now, I'm here to tell you that emotional and social intelligence does not get developed in the lecture hall. Well, it does in mine. I'm just saying. Generally speaking, it doesn't get developed in the lecture hall or in the library. It gets developed organically in the context of student organizations and teams and social networks. Those are the places where the education can best take place that makes the difference between those outstanding leaders after college and the average crowd. Now, if you're not convinced, let's try this. These are the 12 highest mentioned attributes that employers tell us at the UVA Career Center that they're looking for in fourth-year UVA students' resumes. But let me do a little sorting of those attributes for you. If you look at the ones that just popped in orange, what do they have in common? What do you think? How would you describe the theme woven throughout those 8 attributes? Soft skills, good. Non-cognitive variables, emotional intelligence. This is what they're looking for. Now, you said soft skills, and I love that descriptor because it gives me the opportunity to say, there's nothing soft about these competencies. They are the hardcore necessities for success after your students graduate from UVA. So this is what we want to be developing in your young student leaders, and you can help us. You can help us by encouraging them to have a well-rounded and fully engaged experience outside the classroom while they're here at UVA. Now, if your students are interested in going a little further with some of these ideas, some of these emotional resilience skill building approaches, and kind of what separates effective student leaders from average student leaders, I'm going to tell you about a couple of classes in which they can go a little further. This is a new class that I'm piloting this fall called the Resilient College Student, Transition, Thriving, and Leadership. And this course will focus on major life transitions and what it takes to successfully navigate those. We'll drill down on some of the skills associated with successful coping and adult thriving. Now, you should know, if you don't already, that students registering this week are limited to registering for 3 classes. So this might be a class that they would consider when they go back to finish registration starting on August 7th. But again, if you think they'd be interested, mention it to them, encourage them to look into it. Another course that you should be aware of is one called The Art and Science of Human Flourishing. I don't teach this class. David Germano teaches this class. He's doing one of the breakout sessions this afternoon, so if you want to learn more about him or this course, attend that breakout session and he'll probably tell you more about it. But in the Art and Science of Human Flourishing, they will specifically invite first-year students in, and first-year students are welcome in my class as well. And they will look and learn about the daily practices of human flourishing. And lastly, just to let you know about a class that your students aren't eligible for this year, but they are next year and in their 3rd year and their 4th year that I teach in the Batten School, is called Resilient Leadership of Teams. And this is a course in which we look more specifically at leadership of groups of people between 5 and maybe 12, typical organizational business type teams. We look at the finer points of leadership and group dynamics and things that get in the way of interpersonal influence and things that foster interpersonal influence and true teamwork. But we also really drill down on emotional resilience, and that's why I'm telling you about the class. It's really important that leaders have emotional resilience skills, because if leaders don't have the skills to get through the tough times that come with leadership, the finer points of leadership are irrelevant. Okay, strategy 5. Hold on loosely. I hear some giggles. Does anybody remember that song? Yeah? Anybody remember who sang it? Congratulations. That's great, you're old. Don't assume that your students are ready to be the CEOs of their lives. They will need you. Many of you are relieved to hear that. They will need you to help them navigate the many challenges that are just down the road in college and young adulthood. So yes, they'll need you, but don't overmanage them either. The whole point of this time of life is for them to separate and individuate. And that means for you striking a balance of holding on and letting go. But if you had to err on one side or the other, you got to err on the side of letting go. It's too critical of a time in their development to hold on too tightly or too loosely. So let's talk about what that balance looks like. First, did you know that your students' brains right now are developing at a faster rate than at any point in the human lifespan other than infancy? That's a good news story. That means that the work that is yet to be done by you as parents, and to a smaller degree by us at UVA, has the chance to make a big, big difference. But here's the thing. Their brains are out of whack, if you haven't noticed. Right? There's parts of their brains that are overdeveloped and parts of their brains that are underdeveloped. You can probably guess at which part of their brains are overdeveloped right now. It's the limbic system. The limbic system holds the emotional center of their life, the amygdala, right? And the emotional center of their brain between the age of 16 and 24 is overdeveloped. The intellectual, the rational part of their brain, where they make good decisions and anticipate consequences and think things through in a rational manner, offline. So what's the implication that you've noticed with your students about having an overdeveloped emotional brain and an underdeveloped rational brain? What does it look like in their behavior? What is it? Reactionary. Impulsive. Risk-taking. Irritable. Cranky. Right? Just in the moment. Whatever I feel is the way things are. Intense. They're in a risky period. I mean, this time of life, until their prefrontal cortex catches up with their amygdala, they're at a period of elevated risk. But when you help them learn skills and strategies for solving problems and managing intense emotion, the brain produces, I want you to hear this, the brain produces new connections in their prefrontal cortex that help it catch up with their limbic system. That's the benefit of a brain that's developing at the second fastest rate of development in the human lifespan. I'll give you a little example. I often tell students when they arrive on grounds that UVA is going to give them a gift. Actually, I'll say this to them this afternoon. And here's the gift. It's a gift that I personally would do just about anything for. It's an extra 20 to 30 hours of unaccounted for time between 9 and 5 every week. Think about that. And I encourage them to think about every one of those hours. Because you think about it, in high school, their butts are in seats, I mean, roughly from 9 to 4, 8 to 3, whatever you want to call it. About 35 hours a week. Average UVA student's taking 15 hours. That means they're in a seat 3 hours a day. That right there is 20 hours a week. We haven't factored in transportation, after-school sports, or whatever else they might be doing, assuming your student's not an athlete. So I encourage them to think about every one of those hours during the day as a golden poker chip. And they want to cash in as many of those as they possibly can. Because we know that students who study while the sun's still in the sky outperform students who wait until it's dark to do their work. Golden poker chip. Every 60-minute block is one that every one that they can cash in, they're a step closer to achieving their academic ambitions at UVA. That's a strategy. That's one that I use. Find your own. Share those with them. If you can do it in a way that's open and curious and engaging, they're developing new connections in their prefrontal cortex. So that's the holding on part, helping them with strategies, helping them think through problems and new dilemmas, like what do I do with an extra 25 hours a week? But what about the loosely part? This might be where the most well-intentioned and loving parents are unintentionally making it harder for their children to develop resilience. Loosely is hard. And it helps to remember that this transition is bittersweet. You guys remember that song by Big Head Todd and the Monsters called Bittersweet? Nobody's going to admit to it now. He's going to call me old. Play it on the drive home. It might make you cry. And that would be a good thing. It's a happy time. And it's a sad time. It's an exciting time. And no doubt it's full of anxiety for all of you. But do your best not to confuse your need to take care of your anxiety and your sadness with the need to take care of them. Give them space to struggle. Manage the frequency of your contact with them. Now, when I was a counseling center director, I got parents asking me all the time, how much should I be in touch, right? And my answer is always, I don't know for sure. It really depends on your student and your particular situation. But I do know that daily is too much. And texting counts. Last year in this talk, I had a parent sitting right about there. She was in that chair. And she said audibly for me to hear, I guess I shouldn't have bought the house in Charlottesville. You wouldn't do that? Would you ever do that? Would you think about it? If you had the money, is there anything appealing to that to you? Okay. And it immediately endeared me to her because she had the courage to say it out loud. And I also hated her because she could afford to buy a house in Charlottesville. Don't do anything for them that they can't do for themselves. It's time to stop taking care of them. It's time to start being a good listener and offering advice only when they're out of their own ideas or they're on the brink of a real crisis. Otherwise, you will deprive them of the neuroplastic changes that have the opportunity to occur in their brain that will make them more resilient and more successful. Holding on loosely is how you get those connections formed in their brain. So in summary, if you can give them permission to struggle and anticipate that, and that it's okay, if you can support a growth mindset, if you can foster a sense of objective optimism in them, let them know what that's about and why it matters. If you encourage their life outside the classroom, where the competencies are really developed that matter the most for success after graduation, and if you as a parent can hold on loosely, then we think that you all will be doing everything in your power to help your first year have the fantastic and the growth-oriented experience that we all want them to have here at UVA. Good. So we're running a little bit behind, but Tab said to take a couple of questions. So if people have questions, I'm happy to take a couple. And do we have folks with mics? The OLs with mics? If you go, do you have a mic? Oh, mic right here. Yeah, let's go here.
Don't do anything for them that they can't do for themselves, or if they can do for themselves?
So it might be a preference grammar thing, I don't know. You don't want to get in the way, you don't want to do anything for them that they have the ability to navigate and accomplish on their own.
They can do for themselves.
That's a better way to phrase it, yeah. Okay. I'll get back and, did you notice any spelling errors, anything? Other questions? Right here.
So we should encourage them to embrace failure, to be resilient, to struggle. But to get here, they had to be almost perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I know.
And to go further, that is also the expectation. So what is UVA doing?
It's whose expectation?
Like graduate school. So what is UVA doing as an institution to embrace failure and then to encourage the kids visibly to embrace failure, and that failure is okay? Because that's certainly not the message that they've gotten from most academic institutions.
That's a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity to address it. You named the bind beautifully. It's a very mixed message to say, now that you've been so perfect, it's time to start screwing it up. right? So it's a tough message. Here's what we're doing. One, we're listening to you as parents. One of the most frequent comments that came back from this parent talk last year was we need you to give this message to our students. So the talk that I do in the afternoon for all 3,700 incoming first-year students is an iteration of this talk. So that comes from you, and that's one thing we're doing. The Resilience Project that I mentioned earlier is a group of students who are banding together to send the message that it's okay and important that you embrace failure. So to give you an example of something that they're working on, they are developing a collection of failure resumes. Guess who did their first failure resume? Me, right? I was the first specimen. But now they're out getting failure resumes from influential people on grounds and faculty members, and they're publishing them on their website so that they can see that somebody can get their PhD with standardized test scores that are just okay, right? That you can miss an easy shot in the state championship soccer game and recover from it, right? I don't know who that's about. I still have nightmares about it. It's just right there. So the classes, the new curriculums, not curriculum, but the classes that we're offering called The Resilient Student, The Art and Science of Human Flourishing, Resilient Leadership of Teams. Those are all courses about daring yourself to push hard enough that you invariably encounter failure and tying it directly to being a successful adult. So those are some of the things that we're working on, and we're going to continue to push the needle on that. It's going to be a project because it's a tough bind and a tough message to get through. We need your help sending that message. So we're going to end it there. Thank you for our time together today. I really enjoyed it.